Good evening and welcome to tonight's romantic sleep story for grown-ups. Love is on the guest list. Part 1. Standing here, wrapped in the quiet magic of this winter wonderland, I watch as snowflakes descend softly from the sky, each one unique, yet blending seamlessly into the shimmering blanket of white. The world outside feels suspended, as if time itself has paused to savor this peaceful moment. I close the door behind me, the warmth of my small rustic cabin wrapping around me like a gentle embrace, a tender contrast to the crisp, biting air that lingers outside. The flicker of the fireplace casts soft, flickering shadows across the wooden walls, painting the room in a golden glow. I lean against the door for a moment, letting the serenity of the night settle over me. I pause, letting the peaceful hum of the night wrap around me before my thoughts slip back 6 months ago to a summer afternoon when everything I thought I knew about myself and him began to change in the most unexpected way. Nestled on the edge of a sprawling countryside, the farmhouse venue had exuded rustic charm with a quiet elegance. Its whitewashed exterior, accented by sage green shutters and climbing ivy, had looked like something out of a postcard. The wide wraparound porch had welcomed guests with its soft glow from string lights and flower-filled mason jars, leading up from a cobblestone pathway bordered by blooming hydrangeas and lavender. The engagement party was set outdoors, beneath the golden hues of the setting sun. Tables were scattered across the lush green lawn, dressed in crisp white linens and adorned with wildflower arrangements in mismatched glass jars. Wooden chairs with vintage cushions lent a cozy, polished touch. The air carried the mingling scents of freshly cut grass and the sweet aroma of flowers stirred by the soft summer breeze. Nearby, a large red barn glowed warmly in the evening light. Its propped open doors revealed a rustic dance floor, where string lights twinkled from exposed wooden beams. Outside, a small bar offered lemonade, sweet tea, and signature cocktails in frosted glasses. A buffet table held trays of hors d'oeuvres, savory mini tarts filled with goat cheese and caramelized onions, smoked salmon on crisp cucumber rounds, and bruschetta topped with ripe tomatoes and fresh basil. In the distance, a wooden swing swayed gently from an old oak tree, and a gravel path wound toward a shimmering pond that mirrored the colors of the setting sun. As dusk approached, lanterns and candles flickered to life, casting a romantic glow over the scene. This was my best friend's engagement party. That night, we celebrated Christina and Roger, a couple so perfectly in sync. They made love look effortless. Their wedding was set for that winter, but with so many out-of-town guests, Christina decided a meet and greet would be the perfect prelude to the big day. The venue belonged to a close family friend of Roger's, and it couldn't have been more idyllic. The setup was breathtaking, so much so that I couldn't help but imagine this being the perfect place for a wedding, let alone an engagement party. With a half hour to go before guests arrived, Christina and Roger were busy entertaining their soon-to-be in-laws, leaving me free to wander. I found myself drawn to the oak tree and its swing, seeking a quiet moment of reflection, sitting there gazing at the golden ripples of the pond. I felt a bittersweet ache. As happy as I was for Christina and Roger, their relationship somehow cast a shadow of reflection on my own reality. Still single, I hadn't been able to truly open myself to the idea of something new since Jake. Finding the courage to fall in love again had been hard, especially after believing my college sweetheart would be the one, only for us to be separated by different dreams and aspirations that turned out to be worlds apart. He had been my first love, and for a very long time, I had thought he would be my forever love. I guess I still hadn't allowed myself to imagine I could be with anyone else. The sound of approaching voices stirred me from my thoughts, and I headed back toward the farmhouse. Guests were beginning to arrive, their laughter and chatter filling the evening air. Christina spotted me and waved enthusiastically. "Where'd you go? Come on, I want you to meet the rest of the wedding party." I smiled, letting her pull me into the crowd. Christina introduced me to her other bridesmaids, one a sharp-witted co-worker from her firm, and the other a bubbly new friend she had made after moving to the city. Then there was Roger's groomsman, and that's when I saw him. As we moved through the crowd, I noticed him standing near the barn door. He was leaning casually against the wood, finishing off a cigarette, taking a quick inhale before snubbing it out. He pulled his suit jacket collar up, adjusting himself as though preparing to step into the gathering. Christina continued to guide me, her arms slung around mine, tugging me toward the table where guests were starting to find their seats and chat. He was dressed in a sharp suit with no tie, his collar undone, giving him an effortless laid-back style. The worn brown leather shoes and matching belt gave his look a sense of ease, yet it was refined in its own way. His hair was thick and tousled, with natural waves that added texture and volume. A deep, dark brown, the light caught it in a subtle ways, revealing a slightly lighter sheen. The length was perfect for a casually styled look, short on the sides but longer on the top, allowing for an unpolished, just woke up charm that felt intentional. After a few moments, Roger approached with the groomsmen, one of whom I immediately recognized as the man who had caught my eye earlier. He introduced him to the group as his best mate, aka the best man, Hunter, while giving him a proud slap on the back. Hunter pressed his lips into a polite smile, and our eyes met briefly before he quickly shifted his attention to the rest of the wedding party, offering them the same friendly smile and a nod. I couldn't ignore the familiar rush of nerves that fluttered through my chest, paired with the stomach-churning sensation that always seemed to follow when our eyes met. He didn't say much, and there was something about him that felt distant, friendly enough in the moment, but as though he was carrying a weight he was unwilling to show. I was taken aback by the whimsical feeling stirring inside me. I hadn't felt this kind of nervous excitement in a long time. The last time, I think, was when I first started dating Jake. It had been forever since I experienced such an instant magnetic attraction. Hunter was undeniably attractive, intriguing even, perhaps a little mysterious and brooding, which only added to his allure. "So, this is Taylor," Christina announced, pulling me out of my thoughts. She gestured toward me, and I automatically extended my hand to shake. Hunter shook my hand with a firm grip, his expression warm but measured. "Nice to meet you," I said, my voice betraying a bit of nerves I felt. "Same," he responded, his smile barely widening. "Yeah, Hunter and Roger have been friends for 10 years or so?" Christina continued. "Yeah, something like that," Hunter nodded, looking away for a brief moment before turning back to smile at me again. "And Taylor's just awesome," Christina added with a grin, placing a hand on my shoulder and another on Hunter's. "She's my maid of honor. We go way back." I smiled faintly at Christina's words, my thoughts drifting for a moment. Yes, we went way back. But since Christina moved to London and met Roger, our bond hadn't been quite as close. The distance had made it harder to keep up, to stay as intertwined as we once were. "All right, you two get to know each other," Christina said, giving us both a playful nudge. "I'll be right back. Name tags are on the table." She disappeared into the crowd, heading toward Roger, who was now chatting with some out-of-town guests. Hunter and I were left standing there, a quiet tension hanging between us, as if both of us were waiting for something unspoken to pass between us. Our eyes met for a split second, and we both began to search for something to say. We smiled at each other's awkwardness, and Hunter gave a gracious gesture with his hand, silently encouraging me to speak first. We started with the usual small talk, work, life in London versus life in America, and I was struck by how down-to-earth he seemed. Not to mention his accent was absolutely adorable, and before I knew it, I found myself wondering if he was single. There was a brief hesitation on his part before he asked, "Maybe we should find our seats." "Yeah, sure. Why not?" I replied, though I couldn't help the flicker of worry that this might be a polite way of ending our conversation. We began walking toward the tables, but my heel caught on a small hole in the ground. I felt my ankle twist and braced for the inevitable stumble. But before I could fall, I felt Hunter's strong arms steady me. "Whoa, thanks," I said, mortified but grateful, until in the middle of the awkward moment, a waiter bumped into my back. The next thing I knew, I was falling forward into Hunter's arms, my hands landing squarely on his chest. I instinctively stepped back, my face flushing, but Hunter's hands remained lightly on my arms, steadying us both. "Saved me twice," I said, my voice shaking slightly with embarrassed laughter. He chuckled, not at me, but in a warm, reassuring way. For a fleeting moment, our eyes locked, and I noticed his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. There was something in the way he looked at me, something that made my heart skip, but then he quickly glanced away. "Let's go find our seats," he said, his voice calm and steady, breaking the tension. We reached the table, scanning for name tags, but none were placed yet. Hunter, sensing my hesitation, casually pulled out a chair for me. "Guess this is as good a spot as any," he said, gesturing me to sit beside him. A small smile spread across my face, and a warm flutter stirred in my chest at his thoughtful gesture. We settled into our seats, conversation flowing effortlessly between us. It felt surprisingly natural. Just as I began to relax, a catering staff member arrived with a tray of name tags, placing them carefully around the table. That's when we were informed we were meant to sit elsewhere, the best man beside the groom, and the maid of honor by the bride, flanked by the other bridesmaids. "I guess duty calls," I said matter-of-factly, slightly disappointed that my evening with Hunter was being cut short. "Yeah, looks that way," he said with a wry smile. Then with a chuckle he added, "This is the way." He made a quick reference, and I laughed at the unexpected nerdy joke. We shared a smile before we both rose, separating to head to our assigned places. As the speeches began, I found myself watching Hunter closely when it was his turn to speak. There was an effortless confidence in the way he carried himself, like he was completely at ease in front of a room full of people. His words were thoughtful and deliberate, laced with just enough humor to draw a few warm laughs. The jokes were tasteful, the kind that made you smile rather than roll your eyes. But it was the way he wrapped everything together that stayed with me. A simple, heartfelt message wishing Christina and Roger happiness in their future together. It felt genuine, without any over-the-top theatrics, and I found myself impressed in a way I didn't expect. After he finished, he raised his glass in a quiet toast to the couple, and our eyes met. He mouthed, "Cheers." As the dinner plates were cleared and conversations softened, the distant glow from the barn began to draw attention. The soft hum of music floated toward us, mixing with the gentle clink of glasses and murmurs of congratulations. Christina and Roger, their faces alight with joy, announced the date of their winter wedding. Their excitement was contagious, sparking murmurs of delight around the tables. Beyond the barn's warm glow, the dance floor awaited, promising the next phase of the evening's celebration. I asked Christina if she needed any help, but she encouraged me to mingle and get to know the wedding party. The guests, many from out of town, slowly trickled by to offer their congratulations. I joined in, engaging in small talk with Christina's friends and family. I noticed Hunter, too, was making his rounds, chatting with a group of men. He casually draped his arm around one of the groomsmen's sisters, a close family friend, perhaps. After a few moments, he excused himself and made his way toward the barn entrance alone. He was patting his suit pocket, digging into his pants pocket as if searching for a pack of cigarettes. He leaned once again against the barn door, lighting a cigarette, running his hands casually through his hair, one foot propped against the barn's exterior as he blew out a puff of smoke. You know how in those moments when you picture yourself doing something, like walking up to him and putting yourself out there, but then you find yourself still standing there, letting the moment slip by? Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was the weight of being left behind by Jake, or perhaps it was something deeper, something I couldn't quite define. All I knew was that in that instant, I found the courage. I excused myself from the conversation and made my way toward him, like a wave finally crashing after building up its strength. I walked toward him, my heart pounding with a mix of nerves and anticipation. There had been a spark between us earlier, and I couldn't help but wonder if he'd welcome my company. With a deep breath, I felt a newfound surge of courage, as if fate had decided to give me a nudge in his direction. I took a deep breath and continued to stride toward him. As I neared, he lowered his head, noticing me heading over. He smiled awkwardly, quickly putting out his cigarette with his foot. "Sorry," he said, trying to quit. "A bad habit," he muttered, looking sheepish. "No, I just came over to see if you wanted some company." You know, I both love these things and I just feel exhausted by them too. "Does that make any sense?" he asked, surprising me. I hadn't pegged him as the type to get uneasy about small talk. I laughed softly, intrigued. "Yeah, I get it." "Do you want to dance?" he asked suddenly, shifting the conversation. "You know, since we're maid of honor and best man, might be a fun way to get to know each other better," he asked with an awkward confidence. I hesitated, not because I wanted to say no, but because his sudden shift caught me off guard. My eyes narrowed playfully and a smile tugged at my lips. "Yeah, sure," I replied, feeling a mix of curiosity and anticipation. He extended his hand in a gentleman's gesture, and I took it, letting him lead me onto the dance floor. The music was upbeat, and for a while we just danced and laughed, falling into the rhythm of the night. We slipped into a carefree groove, goofing off and sharing light conversation between spins and twirls. We took a few breaks and headed for the bar for more drinks. As the alcohol settled in, I started to feel lighter, freer. The world felt a little softer, and with every glance, our interactions grew more natural. Our touches lingered a little longer. When we returned to the dance floor, the tempo slowed. A soft ballad filled the air, and the shift felt almost inevitable. We still laughed, but now there was something deeper, an undercurrent pulling us closer. Without thinking, we found ourselves drawn to each other, his arms wrapped gently around me, pulling me into the dance. As I rested my head against his chest, the familiarity of being held overwhelmed me. It had been so long since I'd felt this close to someone. But with him, it felt easy, like I could stay here in this moment forever. I breathed in and noticed the scent of his cologne. It was deep and warm, rich and woodsy, yet light enough to feel refreshing. It felt new, and I couldn't help but be drawn to it and to him. His scent wrapped around me, and I felt a pull in my chest, an undeniable urge to be held. Even though we were still just getting to know each other, there was a comfort in his arms that I couldn't ignore. For a brief moment, he rested his cheek on the top of my head, and I closed my eyes, letting myself fall into the calm of his presence. I felt safe there, and I couldn't remember the last time I allowed myself to feel this way. But just as I started to sink further into the comfort of his embrace, he pulled away. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, it felt like we were about to kiss. But instead he shook his head, a quiet hesitation flashing across his face. "I'm sorry," he said softly. stepping back. I stood there frozen. The music continued to play, but it felt distant now. The rhythm suddenly off. I couldn't process what had just happened. The warmth of his presence vanished, and I was left standing alone in the middle of the dance floor. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. The world seemed to blur around me as I shifted awkwardly, unsure of what to do. It felt like the air had thickened, and I was just standing there, feeling foolish, completely alone. The next time I saw Hunter was at brunch the following day. The groomsmen were hanging out, and the bridal party was going wedding dress shopping. But we all convened for one final meal together before going our separate ways. Hunter was there, but our interactions were limited to an awkward, "Hey." We both took our seats at the table without saying much else. He didn't speak to me at all, and I could feel a distance between us. He avoided making eye contact, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things were different after the night before. I passed it off as just a bit of drunken awkwardness, figuring maybe he wasn't interested in getting to know me beyond what he had saw last night at the engagement party. The thought left me with an odd, quiet disappointment, and I had to keep telling myself to stop dwelling on it. I didn't know exactly what had happened, but I also didn't know what to do either, or what to make of it. A few days later, Christina called, asking me for a favor. She explained that she and Roger had some last-minute wedding details to finalize, but had promised to show the out-of-town guests around the city. Since they were tied up, she called it a maid of honor favor. "I just need you to pick them up and do something fun around the city," she said, her voice pleading yet warm. "I'll cover the bill. You just have to play hostess for the day." I laughed, assuring her, "It'll be fun. Don't worry about it." When I arrived at her parents' house, I found the group waiting in the driveway. The 3 groomsmen, including Hunter, 2 bridesmaids, and a cousin. Hunter and I exchanged polite nods, but nothing more. I played the part of the chauffeur, driving the bridesmaid and the cousin while the guys took a separate car. The day flew by in a blur of walking tours, laughter, and a vibrant hum of the city. Sunlight filtering through the trees, and the scent of popcorn and cotton candy in the air, giving everything a sense of carefree excitement. The bridesmaids shared giggles and whispers, while Christina's cousin kept everyone entertained with his quick wit and jokes that had us all in stitches. Hunter remained polite, though he mostly stuck to the guys and Christina's cousin. As the day went on and everyone got to know each other better, the group became more relaxed and familiar, and it was clear that everyone was eagerly anticipating the next stop. By the time we arrived at the amusement park, the buzz of excitement was palpable, and most of them couldn't wait to dive into the thrill of the roller coasters. When we arrived at one of the massive roller coasters, the line was long, curling around a corner, but it didn't seem to dampen anyone's enthusiasm. They all charged ahead toward the entrance, their voices blending into the lively hum of the crowd. "Go ahead," I called out, hanging back. "I need to find the restroom. I'll catch up." "You sure you don't want to come with us? You don't want to wait?" one of the bridesmaids asked, pausing just long enough to get my nod. "No, really. Go ahead. Have fun." I waved them off, grateful for a moment to myself. As the group disappeared into the line, I wandered toward a nearby bench, finally able to enjoy the rare moment of quiet. The sun was warm, and the noise of the park felt distant enough to create a sense of calm. I sank into the bench, the warm sun on my face as I let out a deep sigh. The sounds of the park faded into a gentle murmur, and for a moment it felt like I was the only one in the world, the quiet calm of the day wrapping around me. I thought maybe you'd like some company. I turned, startled to see Hunter standing there, holding 2 water bottles and wearing that disarming smile of his. "What are you doing here?" I asked, sitting up a little straighter. He handed me one of the bottles and shrugged as he sat down next to me. "Not a big fan of the roller coasters, and I'm okay to sit this one out." That's unexpected," I said, giving him a playful look. "You seem like the type who'd love the adrenaline rush." He laughed and leaned back against the bench. "Maybe, but sometimes it's better to skip the chaos." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the roller coaster loop high above the trees. I thought he might leave it at that, but then he turned toward me, his fingers fidgeting with the bottle cap. "Hey," he said, his voice softer now. "About the other night." I glanced at him, curiosity bubbling inside me. That something about his expression and body language told me to hold back. My gut told me to show some compassion. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I wanted to apologize for just taking off the other night." I could tell he wanted to say more, but something held him back. His conflicted expression deepened, and the weight of it seemed to fill the space between us. I felt the need to lighten the moment, to draw us away from whatever was pulling him down. "It's okay," I said gently, offering him a warm, reassuring smile. "Apology accepted." "You know what? Let's just start over." I extended my hand playfully. "Hi, I'm Taylor, maid of honor. It's nice to meet you." He let out a slow breath, his shoulders visibly relaxing, as if a weight had finally been lifted. A soft chuckle escaped him, low and warm, as he dropped his head for a moment, running a hand through his tousled hair. When he looked back at me, his gaze was magnetic, those deep, brown eyes holding a quiet intensity that made my heart skip. His smile, effortlessly charming and just a little shy, was the kind you'd find yourself dreaming about long after the moment was gone. "Hey," he said, his voice low and smooth as he took my hand in his. "I'm Hunter. And yeah, it's really nice to meet you." We both smiled, the air between us lighter now, but charged with something that felt new and full of promise. As the roller coaster roared by in the distance, I couldn't help but notice how close we were sitting. My hand rested on the bench between us, and at some point, his fingers brushed mine. Neither of us moved. I couldn't even bring myself to look at him, the quiet tension between us hanging in the air. I kept thinking of something to say, but every time I almost glanced at his direction, I found myself afraid to meet his eyes. Luckily, Hunter had this way of making everything seem easy. He'd crack a joke to break the tension, and somehow he made me feel like he was genuinely interested in what I had to say. Not in that forced, polite way, but with real curiosity. And I found myself wanting to say more, just to keep the conversation flowing. Hunter's eyes were a deep brown, like black coffee with just a hint of milk and rum mixed in. And when he looked at me, it felt like being drawn into something unknowable, like being lured to the sheer curtain as morning sunlight softly filters into a bedroom when you first wake up. I wanted to look, to get closer, to feel the warmth that came with it. The rest of the day flew by. Being with him felt effortless, but that nagging thought in the back of my mind never fully faded, wondering why he'd acted so distant the first night we met. He was so charismatic, charming, and undeniably handsome. I couldn't put my finger on what had unsettled me, but at the same time, I didn't care. I liked having his attention, and I genuinely enjoyed getting to know him. When I was around him, the guard I usually kept up around love seemed to crumble, and if I were being honest with myself, I wanted it to. For so long, I had convinced myself I wouldn't find someone like Jake again. Hunter wasn't Jake, but I think that's what intrigued me the most. He made me feel easy, but at the same time scared and giddy all at once. Later that night, we all decided to ride the Ferris wheel. As we climbed higher, the city unfurled beneath us, lights flickering like tiny stars on the ground, blending with the sky above. The world felt distant, like we were suspended in a quiet, private moment, just the two of us and the vast night. The soft hum of the Ferris wheel was the only sound, a gentle lull that made everything else fade away. At the top, the air was cooler, and I felt it brush against my skin, making me shiver. Hunter noticed, his eyes softening with a quiet attentiveness. Without a word, he removed his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. The fabric soft and warm from his body, like a shield against the cool night. The scent of his cologne lingered in the air, subtle and comforting. "You look like you needed this more than me," he said, his voice low and reassuring. His hand brushed against my arms as he adjusted the jacket, and I felt the fleeting touch like a spark, one I wished had lasted longer. As he adjusted the jacket on my shoulders, the faint scent of his cologne filled the space between us, stirring something in me. The distance suddenly felt unbearable. I wanted to lean into him, to let his warmth chase away the evening chill. His gaze lingered on mine for just a moment, soft and searching, before flickering to my lips. The air seemed to shift, thickening with something unsaid. I thought, hoped he might kiss me, but instead he smiled a little sheepish and turned his attention back to the twinkling city below. There was a beautiful silence between us as we admired the view. It was one of those rare moments that felt timeless, the kind you wish could last forever. I tugged on his hoodie to pull it tighter across my shoulders as we slowly descended the Ferris wheel, the city lights twinkling beneath us. The warmth of his jacket was comforting, but there was a part of me that wanted more than just his jacket. more than just this quiet moment between us. Hunter seemed lost in thought, his gaze distant, fixed on the horizon. I wondered what he was thinking, what memories or emotions might be stirring behind that composed exterior. The quiet between us felt almost sacred, yet I couldn't resist breaking it. It's beautiful up here, peaceful, don't you think? Hunter glanced at me, his jaw tightening for just a second before he responded. It is. Reminds me how much simpler things can feel when you're above it all. I tilted my head, studying him. He always seemed to have the knack for saying something that felt light, but carried weight if you really listened. He was like a book with a stunning cover, one I wasn't sure if I should crack open or leave sitting on the shelf. But curiosity nudged at me, so I let a hint of humor sneak into my voice. At least, I hoped it came off as subtle. Simpler? What's so complicated about your life, Mr. World Traveler? His lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He exhaled softly, as if weighing his words. I guess sometimes distance isn't enough to leave certain things behind. My eyebrows furrowed slightly, and for once I didn't have a quick response. There was something in the way he said it, a heaviness that felt entirely too raw for someone as composed as him. And yet I couldn't help but feel drawn to the mystery of it, like there was so much more beneath the surface. A breeze swept through the gondola, carrying the scent of pine and something crisp and cold. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His words sat between us, unspoken questions swirling in my head, but I couldn't bring myself to ask them. Instead, I just offered him a small smile, hoping he might know I understood, even if I wasn't entirely sure what I was understanding yet. As the Ferris wheel reached the ground and we were preparing to step off, Hunter offered me his hand. I placed mine in his, the simple touch sending a small thrill through me. The way his fingers gently closed around mine made my heart flutter. He helped me down from the platform, and for a moment we stood there, close, the world around us fading into the background. I couldn't help but feel like I was in a fairy tale, as though I'd stepped into a moment I could never quite capture again. I quickly returned his jacket to him, but he smiled softly, shaking his head. Keep it, he said. You might get cold later. I'll grab it once we get back to the cars. It was a casual remark, but it made my heart race. I nodded, slipping my arms back into the jacket as we walked toward the exit. After I dropped the group off at their respective hotels, I realized Hunter had forgotten his jacket. I didn't want to make a big deal of it, but a small smile crept onto my face as I drove home wearing it. I couldn't bring myself to take it off right away. When I got home, I sat on my bed, the jacket in my lap, and without thinking, I pulled it close, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne. The memory of him washed over me. How fond I had become of him, enchanted by the way he made me feel. Each small gesture, each fleeting moment had only deepened my feelings for him. The thought of seeing him again the next day filled me with nervous excitement. There was a dinner planned before the wedding party headed back to London, and I couldn't help but wonder what might unfold then. What could happen between us in the moments we still had left?